Hello everyone. Okay, so on my newsletter the other day, we talked about how to gather easily, and then I showed some little pictures of this little piece of fabric that I did some gathering on, but it was the same. It was like white muslin fabric and then white thread, and so it was a little hard to see. So I wanted to make a video to kind of re-explain what I was saying about how to gather much easily. So in the past, what I read in books, they showed how to gather in one way, and then you would put a pin in it, and then wrap your threads around the pin, and to me it was not only tedious, but it didn't look very secure. And then you always had to worry about both ends of your thread coming loose, or both ends of your gathering coming loose. So I drew a little square piece of fabric up here, and we have end one, or the first end, the end that you start on, and then end two, the end that you're going to finish on. And so that'll help me explain it. Then I also put these little notches here. I didn't put a finishing notch because we're going to assume that this fabric goes on for a while and we're going to be gathering quite a bit. But normally you'll have a starting notch and a finishing notch, so you'll know exactly what spacing the gathering is going to happen within. So on the first end, in the past, stuff I had read before, and you may have seen this too, in the books they'll tell you to have a nice what do you call it? Some trailing thread or whatever at the beginning, and then right where you're supposed to start gathering, you'll start your stitch, and then you'll stitch all the way down to the next notch, and then you'll just pull your needle up and then pull some extra thread and then snip it. So you want to leave the thread ends long at the beginning and the end. And then what you do at the beginning, you'll put a pin in your fabric, and they say for you to do kind of like a figure eight with the thread, kind of weaving it around the pin that you put in the fabric. And then you'll hold these threads and you'll pull the fabric like this and grab the thread again, and then grab the thread closer, and just keep doing this number until you've gathered your fabric in. And that does work. It's just a little longer because you have to wrap this, and to me it didn't make a whole lot of sense because it doesn't look very secure. And as you're gathering, especially if you have a lot to gather, these threads are going to start coming loose because you've just done it with your hand, around this pin, and the pin could come out or whatever, especially if it's a heavy fabric. Or anyway, so what I started to do was this down here, where I have the notch where I'm supposed to start. I'll put my needle down, and then I'll back stitch, and then I'll restitch coming forward, and then wherever, what am I thinking? So wherever the notch is, that's where the first stitches ended, the back stitches, that's where they end. So then you just continue stitching all the way forward with your basting stitch, and then once you get to the second notch, stop sewing, pull your needle up, and then you'll just pull some thread and then snip it so that the thread is long. And then do the same thing. So you're going to do 2 rows of stitching, okay? One is going to be like, if you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance, you're going to do one like a 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and then do the next one like, I want to say less than a 1/2 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric, so that you don't get on your 1/2 inch seam allowance. That would be ideal. Now, if you have to get really close to your 1/2 inch seam allowance, that's okay. Just try not to do an actual 1/2 inch with your basting stitch because it may show on the outside of the fabric. Anyway, so you'll do your 2 rows of stitching. I would start at my notch, put my needle down into the fabric, back stitch, and then stitch forward, go all the way to the end. At the other end, do not back stitch. Just pull your needle up, pull some of your thread out, snip it, and then you can grab your thread and start pulling this down all the way until you get to this notch. And then your gathering will stop at the notch, but you don't have to worry about it coming loose at the end because you've back stitched. And of course, don't be too rough with it, and try to, do it all crazy, because your thread may break anyway if you're a little too rough. So you have to do it slowly. But this, hopefully you can see this good. This is the piece of fabric that I had on the little email that I had pictures of. So hopefully you can see that. Let me look at my camera real quick. Yeah. So you can kind of see what I was talking about. You have your 2 rows of stitching. It looks so much neater when you use 2 rows of stitching. Let me see if this is, yeah, autofocus is on. So, anywho, like I said, it's so much neater if you use 2 rows of stitching. Hold on just a second. There we go. Ah, look at there. Okay. So you can see here if the camera stays focused. I have 2 rows of stitching, and I did it just to see if I could gather this fabric the way I was talking about, and yada yada yada. This is my back stitching here. So hopefully you can see that. Okay. And then right where the back stitching stops, that's where the fabric was allowed to gather. And so really I just gathered the fabric until, you know, it wouldn't take any more fabric in this space. And then I would just hold my threads here, and then just keep pulling it down like this along the edge. That's how I get this looking like this. Now, you can do just 1 row of gather, or 1 row of basting stitch together with, but then the fabric, you see how it's doing on the top and the bottom edge. It's kind of going all over the place, and it's forcing itself backwards and forwards in order to get all that fabric in the same amount of space. So you can do 1 row. It's just a lot neater if you do 2 rows. I've done 1 row in the past because I didn't want to take the time to do 2 rows, and it's just not as neat, especially when you're trying to force this to sit down so you can actually stitch it to something while it's gathered. And it's just a lot easier to do, as you can tell here. It's a lot easier to do when you have 2 rows than if you just have 1 row, which would be more similar to this. So anyway, that's it, y'all. I hope that made sense for you. I hope this video isn't looking crazy to you, because I can see it's kind of jumping back and forth. But anyway, thank y'all very much, and talk to you later.